testing out Viviva watercolor sheets for the very first time and my first thoughts on how these compare to regular watercolors. Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and thank you so much for joining me today for another art video. The awesome people from Viviva Colors were very kind to send me a couple of their products to test out and share with you guys. I'm going to be taking you through my swatching process for this entire range of colors so that we're able to see the variety of colors offered, we're able to see how vibrant they are when compared to regular watercolors, and I'm also going to be doing a couple of other tests that I'm always interested in knowing about because I use these techniques a lot with my own watercolor painting process, such as I want to know how these perform wet on wet, I want to know how they are when layered, and I'm also interested in knowing how they lift both when the paint is still wet and when the paint has already dried. Aside from these things, I'm also going to be sharing a bit on the usability of this product and just some interesting things that I find along the way. Alright, so these are two of the beautiful packages that arrived at my front door the other day, and I'm going to do the unboxing with you, though I've already ripped that flap open because I'm just terrible at opening things up. I always tend to destroy the packaging. So I already did that off camera, but I'm gonna go ahead and take out these items now. So these two packages contain, I guess you could refer to them as two different kinds of sets offered by Viviva. One of them, this first one that I'm opening up, is what they consider to be their gift set. And as you can see, these watercolor sheets in this set actually come with a protective wooden kind of front and back cover, and you can actually customize it with your name or the name of whoever you're going to be gifting this item to, as well as a little quote or something that you want to add to the bottom of that front protective cover. So you have kind of two open text spaces that allow you to personalize this wooden cover however you'd like. The wooden covers are nice and strong and smooth, and the material holding the front and back covers together is actually leather, I think, from the smell of it. And as you can see, the top part has this elastic, which I am guessing I'm going to be able to slide the actual color sheet booklet into so that everything is held in place very nicely. Alright, so the actual color sheet booklet is protected with a plastic. And I noticed that there was this little string kind of coming out of this little section of the plastic, but I had no idea what that string was for. I didn't realize that it was intended to help you actually open up that plastic covering until I was opening the second set. So I just opened this one with my X-Acto knife. I was just super careful because I didn't want to damage the booklet. Right there you can actually see the white string that I was talking about before. And it's not actually attached to the booklet in any way. You can just pull it out. Alright, so let's do a quick flip through just to get an idea for the different colors that are offered in these sheets. And I really appreciate that the tab at the bottom shows an indication of the different colors included in that particular sheet. So those first two colors are crimson and deep pink. And just off plain sight in this dry state, I can tell that the first one is a bit lighter than the second one. However, it's going to be interesting to see if these colors are actually different once they are swatched out on watercolor paper. I immediately noticed that there is this little empty space under each color that contains the color name, and it also doubles as a little kind of area where you can swatch out the color itself. So that's pretty nice. This said, this paper is obviously not watercolor paper, so it's only useful up to a certain extent, I think, because pigment is going to react differently on actual watercolor paper, right? The next two colors are vermilion and dusk orange. And this vermilion looks a little bit orange to me. Usually I would think of vermilion as more on the reddish side, but we'll see how this performs when I actually swatch it out. The next two colors are chrome yellow and gold ochre. In between these color sheets, as you can see, there is an extra sheet of something that looks like parchment paper, which I'm sure is gonna be not only helpful, but a must to have in between these sheets once you start adding water to them. And I can see this becoming a mess if that protective sheet wasn't there in between the different colors. The next two colors are Burnt Umber and Burnt Sienna, and I am already very happy to see that there are at least a couple of different browns and a few different yellows within these watercolor sheets, because these are all colors that I run out of very, very fast. I use them a lot in my own watercolor painting, so that's good to know. The next two colors are Light Green and Sap Green. And these look like greens that I really like using. I don't really like the greens that have a lot of blue in them, so I'm pretty happy with these green options. And the next few colors really caught me off guard. The first one says it's a Viridian, which for me, Viridian is a blue-green in my regular sets of watercolors. And this color on that little rectangle looks like a kind of a metallic purplish color with streaks of dark bluish green throughout. And the second one says it's a peacock blue, and it looks like a metallic kind of reddish purple color. So I'm really interested in seeing how these actually swatch out. The next two colors are Persian Blue and Violet, and these also caught me off guard because the first one looks, once again, like a sort of reddish, purplish, almost brownish color, and it looks very metallic. And the one below it looks like a metallic green, and it says it's violet, so that's gonna be super interesting to swatch out. And finally, we have our last two colors, which are Magenta and Slate Black, for a total of 16 different colors. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but I am running my finger over the powder that I see on these sheets of parchment paper in between the different colors, so I guess a little fallout, because I've definitely seen reviews in the past for this kind of product in which the user explains how their fingers end up with a lot of color on them that is difficult to remove. And I can definitely see this being the case. I'm not actually running my finger over the little rectangles of color. I'm just running it over the little tiny fallout here and there whenever I find some on the protective sheets in between the colors. And I do see some color on my fingers. Fortunately, I'm the kind of artist that is used to the mess, and I don't really mind it in the name of art creation. I'm constantly teaching classes and end up with paint in my hair and on my arms and stuff like that, and I'm just used to it. So that doesn't really make much of a difference. It's not a negative for me. All right, and finally, as I move on to the last pages of this booklet, I find this extra loose section of cardboard that can actually be attached onto the very last page in the booklet to create a little bit of a color mixing palette. And I thought that this was very smart because this way you can take it anywhere with you if you want to do some quick sketching in a coffee shop or outside in plein air or something like that. You at least have that with you, even though it is pretty small. I personally always need my color mixing palette with me, as well as my absorbent towel when I am doing some watercolor sketching or painting. But I do appreciate them adding this in, and I'm sure I'll give it some use. I follow some simple instructions that I find right there on the last sheet within this booklet to attach this extra little piece of cardboard onto it for this little paint mixing palette. All right, so we're all done here, and it's now time to actually slip in these color sheets or this booklet into the wooden case or cover. The elastic looks like it's great quality, and the color sheets fit perfectly into the wooden covers. It looks pretty nice, and I like how it's quality and yet lightweight. So you can easily slip it into your bag and take it to do some sketching or painting outside. All right, and finally, before moving into the next section of this video, I want to very quickly talk about the instructions that appear in the first page of this booklet. It says, the color sheets look different than their actual color on paper as the pigment is super saturated. It also says that the partition paper between colors is covered with a special water repellent coating to avoid sticking to the wet colors. It also says we recommend that you let the colors dry before closing the color sheets. It also says Viviva color sheets are safe for use, but needless to say, do not ingest them. And finally, it says please wash your hands with soap after use and have fun. This gift set also includes a portable watercolor brush that you can fill up with water and take with you wherever you go. It's been a while since I used one of these actually. I remember one of my very first watercolor sets, which was the Sakura Koi watercolors. They came with one of these and I remember using it back then. And this one does look like it's better quality to me when compared to that last one. But I'm interested in seeing how this one performs and I'm gonna be doing some tests with it later. Before getting into our swatches, I just wanted to share this second package with you. This is what Viviva Colors refer to as their Sketchers set. So it's the same thing, just that it doesn't come with this beautiful wooden cover. And you can see right there how in this one I actually use the white string to open up that plastic covering. All you have to do is pull it upwards and it creates a slit in that plastic. Okay, you guys, so let's go ahead and test those colors out. So here's the sheet of watercolor paper that I have prepared with 16 empty spaces. You can see how I've already written down the name of each color, and right below them I also have 3 separate squares in which I'm going to be testing out specific techniques that I'm interested in knowing about. And just so you're aware, I am using Hahnemuehle Burgund 120-pound watercolor paper block. Hahnemuehle does have artist grade watercolor paper, but this is not part of that line. This is kind of their student grade quality watercolor paper. So I just want you to be aware of that because, as many of you are probably already well aware, the type and the quality of the paper that you're using can certainly be a variable in how everything turns out at the end. Before getting started with these swatches, I just want to very quickly send out a huge warm welcome to everyone that is just visiting my channel today for the very first time. I am so happy that you're here, and do consider subscribing because every single week I share a new video with art tips, drawing and painting tutorials, and encouragement for artists. Alright, so I've prepared myself with a little glass of clean water, and when we're doing our swatches, it's so very important to make sure that we're working with clean water. So I'm going to keep an eye on it throughout this process and make sure that I am constantly changing it along the way. We have to make sure that we are cleaning out our paintbrush bristles thoroughly between each color in order to not contaminate the next color and make sure that we're arriving at a nice and clear indication of what the color actually looks like in itself. Quite a while back, I shared another swatching video in which I was testing out a watercolor tube set by Winsor & Newton. That's a pretty good video for people just getting started with watercolor because I explain a lot about important watercolor qualities to know about and specific things to look for when you're testing out watercolor terms and stuff like that, and I highly recommend you check it out. I'm going to make sure to leave a link to that one down below in the description box in case you're interested. For now, let's go ahead and swatch these colors out. I'm going to get started with the crimson, and you're going to notice that I first swatched it out on the actual little empty space right below the rectangle of color in my watercolor sheets. And then I continue taking out more of that pigment from that lower left corner of that rectangle right there with my wet paintbrush. I very gently swivel it around that color and bring it onto my watercolor paper. Right away, I can tell that I don't need a very large amount of water at all to activate that pigment. And I'm actually making sure to remove the excess water from my paintbrush bristles after having gone into my jar of water there by blotting them on my absorbent towel. This helps me just steer clear of unnecessary messes, and also I feel it's gonna help me just make this paint last longer. Alright, so that's the crimson swatch right there, and as you can see, this is incredibly vibrant and I didn't have to use much of the product at all to create those results. So let's now move on to the deep pink. I want to see if these reds are different. Alright, so these two reds look quite similar to me, but this deep pink looks a little bit warmer to me than the crimson. Let's move on to vermilion, which, as I was mentioning before, I always thought of vermilion as a more of a reddish color, and this looks like it's more on the orange side to me. And indeed it is. It looks more like a bright orange to me. However, this doesn't really bother me because I already have two reds. Let's move on to the dusk orange, and this turned out to be one of my favorites in this set. It's a beautiful bright orange and it just seems to glow. I hope that you can tell the difference between the previous orange color and this one. We'll see if they still look different at the end once everything is dry. Let's move on to the chrome yellow. It definitely looks orange on the sheet, but you can see that it's a very bright yellow. Let's move on to the gold ochre, and this turned out to be somewhere in between the dusk orange and the chrome yellow. So as you can see, this watercolor set has plenty of yellows and oranges, and we're gonna move on to browns in just a bit. All of these so far have been incredibly vibrant and very easily activated with just a little bit of water. A few of these colors look very similar to each other, which is my only concern. However, most of these colors that are similar to each other are colors that I use a lot when it comes to painting with watercolor, so this just means that I have more of those colors that I love so much. So whether this is a good or a bad thing, I think would depend on the type of subject that you personally like to paint. Alright, so let's move on to the burnt umber and the burnt sienna. Let's see how they are different from each other. Usually in my watercolor sets, the burnt umber is a very dark brown, and the burnt sienna is of course a reddish brown. I can already see that the burnt umber in this set is not nearly as dark as a burnt umber that I am used to, but the burnt sienna is pretty similar. These two colors in this set are very similar, as you can probably tell. And the only thing that I am kind of concerned about right now is that I usually make use of the burnt umber quite a bit in order to darken certain colors and to just neutralize certain colors. So if I don't have that dark brown, I have to see what I'm gonna do to create those darker values, especially when I'm creating paintings that are a bit more on the realistic side of the spectrum, because it's so important to have those colors that you can add to other colors to either neutralize them a bit to get them a little bit more desaturated, or to darken them. So that's what I'm thinking of right now. All right, moving on to the greens included in this set. We have the light green, we have the sap green, and we have viridian. I really love the light green. I think it's very glowy and it's very warm. It's the kind of green that I love using. The sap green is definitely a lot brighter and lighter than the sap greens that I'm used to. Of course, colors vary from brand to brand, so it's not like all sap greens are the same, but this sap green is definitely very light. Usually sap greens, at least the ones that I've used a lot in the past, they are more muted and darker. And finally, the viridian green is very similar to other viridians that I have used from normal watercolor sets. This is a cool green that has some blue in it. And the viridian and the peacock blue are definitely the colors that I was very interested in testing out, because the color that you see in the little rectangle there definitely does not look like a viridian or a peacock blue in any way, shape, or form, but indeed they are a green and a blue. And the peacock blue is very similar to a turquoise color that I have seen in one of my Winsor & Newton sets. It's very, very bright. Moving on to the Persian blue and the violet, which are also the kind of wild card colors that I was super interested in testing out. The Persian blue, as you can see, is a bluish purple. The violet, which looks like a metallic green rectangle right there on the sheet, is indeed a purple. And what I notice about this purple is that it is quite saturated and very, very pigmented. I grabbed the exact same amount or less than I did with other colors, and it went on very dark and saturated right off the bat. It covered up all of the little letters in that swatching little space right beneath the color. Finally, we're moving on to the magenta and the slate black. The magenta goes on very, very bright. I feel it is a little bit more transparent than the previous color because I can see the letters through the color right there on the little swatching section beneath the paint. And I did like the slate black. Usually when I work with watercolors, I try to stay away from using ready-made blacks. And I'm gonna leave a link to a video that I shared in the past explaining why I don't like using ready-made blacks down below in the description box for you in case you're interested in checking that one out. But essentially, ready-made blacks like Ivory Black, Lamp Black, Mars Black, in certain brands, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to be very flat. They don't have a color temperature to them or a vibrancy. They oftentimes lead to very stark and heavy results and tend to muddy up or dirty up our other colors. This said, I do know of artists that use black successfully. And they are very skillful at integrating different colors and making a play with different colors to create a variation in color and transparency when they use that black. Most of the time, I really like creating my own dark color mixtures, but I am interested in testing this black out because it does look somewhat vibrant to me and it doesn't look as flat as other blacks that I have seen. Okay, so let's allow all of those colors to dry completely and we'll come back to them in a bit to see how they look when they're dry. So now I'm gonna do 3 different tests. I'm gonna test out overlapping colors and then we're gonna test out a couple of different colors wet on wet. So what I decided to do for this one is I painted a yellow section and a green section and I allowed them to dry before going over them with 2 different colors. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because in my own painting process, I often work in layers. So if that bottom color is disturbed, when I go on top of it with a wash of another color, this could possibly be a problem for me. So right there, I decide to create that second wash with my burnt umber. And as you can see, I am overlapping over both the yellow and the green. And I can definitely see some disturbance in the bottom layer of paint. If you notice the edge of that yellow on the far left, we cannot see it anymore. So it kind of blended in completely with the second layer of paint. You can also tell that the left edge of the green shape kind of moved around a little bit as well when I was painting in that brown. So let's see what happens if I try to overlap some of that Persian blue on my yellow and my green shapes. It's definitely transparent and I can still see the edges of that yellow and green shape underneath. I'm definitely interested in actually using my color mixing palette, which I'm not really using right now because I'm testing these out in a very saturated state and straight from the color sheet. But I'm just wondering if I had allowed the previous layers to dry even for a longer time and I went over them with a watery color mixture. So if I actually were using my color mixing palette and added even more water into the color mixture to make them even more translucent, I'm wondering if the overlapping would look different, if the bottom color would show even more, and if it were less disturbed. So that's definitely something that I'm interested in seeing in an actual painting process. All right, so let's try to do some lifting and I'm gonna try it out on both paint that is still wet and paint that has dried. I wanna see how much this paint stains the paper, how much I'm able to lift, which of course has a lot to do with the paper that I am using and its level of absorbency. And as you can see, while the paint is still wet, I use my blue absorbent towel to lift up some of that pigment from my paper and a lot of it is able to get removed. Let's do the same thing with the peacock blue and we can see that a lot of that color is lifted up as well. So after having allowed my paint to dry completely, I am now going back in with a clean and only slightly dampened paintbrush to do some gentle scrubbing on top of those colors and I'm gonna see how much I'm able to lift up in this way. You're gonna notice that I'm able to lift up more of the blue than of the red. And this is a normal thing. Even with regular watercolors, different pigments react differently. They have different characteristics even within the same paint set. And finally, I want to do a wet on wet test because so far we've only been painting in these colors wet on dry. So after having removed all of the pigment from my paintbrush bristles, I go in and pre-wet this little area of my watercolor paper using clean water, and I make sure to arrive at a nice even sheen before dropping in my pigment, just the same way that I would do it if I was working with regular watercolors. I decided to go in with one of my favorite colors in this set, which is the dusk orange, and this particular pigment at least worked beautifully into the wetness of the paper. The paint moved around nicely, creating a nice variation in color and transparency all throughout. And then I went in with my deep pink color and I dropped it into this previous color while it was still wet. I really wanted to see what happened in terms of blooms. And you're gonna see me create blooms both with this red color by dropping it into the previous color, as well as by dropping in a tiny little drop of clean water. And this does definitely create very interesting effects, but it is very different from regular watercolors. Because even though there is a certain level of gradation that is happening around that red, it's not really transitioning outwards as much. It's still staying very limited in one same section. And the most concentrated area of red looks very opaque when compared to the effects I get with regular watercolor. Later on, when I show you this in its fully dry state, you're gonna notice that those initial little arms around the bloom, they're not even that visible anymore in most of the sections around or the edges around the red that I have placed. All right, and just to finish up before I provide my final observations in this first experiment, I want to test out this portable watercolor brush. I have loaded it with some water and I'm going to do some tests using the light green and a few other colors. So I'm basically just playing around with colors a bit and it's pretty funny, but at the end, after this has dried completely, I actually end up with something that looks a little bit more like a cauliflower, a little section of a cauliflower, when compared to the previous experiment when I was actually trying to do that intentionally. I'm gonna make sure to zoom into the final and completely dry product so that you can actually see what I'm referring to. So essentially, to get some water to drip down to the bristles of the paintbrush, you have to press down very gently on its barrel, and a little drop of water comes down and moistens the bristles of your paintbrush. It definitely takes some practice in getting used to, but really every single new paintbrush requires practice in getting used to, whether it's a portable brush or not. It takes some practice, it takes some getting used to, and just getting a hold of that water control with this new item. Right here, I just wanted to show you my hands so that you can see how my fingers have ended up pretty stained. And it took a couple of hand washes for that color to go away completely. So I definitely can see how my hands are gonna end up covered in color when I'm actually creating a painting. All right, you guys, so I just wanna share a few final observations with you. This is an actual photo that I took several days after I had completed the swatching process. And so everything is 100% bone dry and completely settled into the paper by this point. Even though these colors are transparent and I am looking forward to using them like regular watercolors, I do get the feeling that these are more like ink or dye than regular watercolor paint. Not that this is a bad thing, because there are lots of amazing artists out there creating beautiful artwork with inks. But it's just important to know what to expect. Because of all of this, I'm not quite sure how light fast they are. I don't know how fast the color fades, and because of this, I don't think that I would use them for a paid commission or a larger watercolor piece or something like that. But I would have to see. I'm definitely going to be creating paintings with these and see if the color stands the test of time. I'd say that the colors are incredibly vibrant and bright, and the color sheets themselves are indeed very pigmented. I can see the little rectangles lasting a very long time. Especially if, as I was mentioning throughout this process, we make sure to only add in a tiny bit of water at a time and gently swivel in and bring it onto our paint mixing palette and just shift the water and color ratios there so that we can actually make these last longer and keep everything as clean as possible throughout the process. If we start mindlessly bringing in water into our color sheets, I can definitely see this becoming a huge mess because they are so easily activated. I feel that the size and the weight of the product is awesome for people who want to sketch outdoors or somewhere like a coffee shop or somewhere else outside their own studio. It's small, it's compact, it's lightweight. I would, however, make sure to put the color sheets in some sort of little bag or a Ziploc bag or something like that, because if you just want to pick up and go after having a quick sketch and everything is not completely dry, you don't want that color to stain your bag or wherever it is that you're actually carrying the color sheets in. If you're the kind of person that doesn't like staining your hands, I would recommend making sure that you're keeping everything as clean as possible throughout the process, and most likely than not, you're still gonna end up with some sort of color on your fingers, but make sure to do a double wash at the end or something. Another thing that I would really make sure to do, especially if you're looking to create more of a complete painting, not so much a simple illustration, but more the type of work that I usually like doing, which is composed out of different layers and requires creating different values and things like that, then I would certainly make sure to test out the colors and color mixtures you create on a scrap piece of watercolor paper before actually going into your painting with them. If you're a fan of using blooms and certain wet-on-wet techniques, then I would just be aware that the final result is going to look quite different from regular watercolor paint. You can see right here on the wet-on-wet / bloom little square right there that I created near the end of this process. When I was dropping in the red paint into the wet yellow paint beneath it, we did see the cauliflower-like arms coming outwards, but it dried quite differently. We can see how that red didn't completely dissipate outwards into the yellow, even though that previous color was very wet when I placed it on top. Most of the red stayed concentrated in one small little area. However, I did really like how the yellow reacted when I placed it on the pre-wetted paper. When it was just plain yellow, I really liked that because I was able to create that variation in values and transparencies throughout this square, just like I would with regular watercolor. I want you to notice how I kind of accidentally created more of a normal watercolor bloom or cauliflower effect in the little experiment beside the square where I was just playing around with the refillable water brush. So I would say that if you're looking for that kind of bloom effect, I would test out these on a separate piece of watercolor paper before actually using them in your painting. And this is the same suggestion that I would make in terms of if you're looking to overlap colors together, just make sure that you test them out. And I would say allow the previous layer of color to dry completely until it's bone dry, because I was definitely moving the previous color around a bit, even though I thought I had already allowed it to dry. And finally, in terms of the lifting, just as with regular watercolors, we can see how certain colors allow for better lifting than others, both when the paint is still wet and when the paint is already dry. I don't know if you can see this through the picture, but the peacock blue actually separated while it was drying, and I can see a purple outline all throughout its edges. All right, so I am incredibly excited to actually get painting with these color sheets. I can see that the process is going to be different in many ways to what I am used to, but I love exploring different mediums and experimenting, and I feel that the skills that I gain with one medium opens up new horizons for me and just increases my skills overall and permeates into everything else that I choose to do. So thank you, Viviva, for sending me this amazing product. I am incredibly excited to use it more. And if you're interested in seeing what I create with these, make sure to follow me over on Instagram because I always share my paintings and my artwork over there.
as soon as it is created. And I'm also going to be sharing, I'm sure, videos here at my channel, as well as videos over on Viviva's YouTube channel, which is new, and I highly recommend you check it out if you want to see paintings created with this product, as well as learn more about it. I'm going to make sure to leave a link to their YouTube channel and to their website and social media down below in the description box in case you're interested in checking it out.
Alright everyone, that is going to do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you found it helpful or inspiring in some way, and if you did, I would really appreciate a thumbs up because it really helps support the work that I am doing here on YouTube and allows more people to get to know about my channel. If you have any questions or comments for me, make sure to leave them down below in the comment section and I'll try my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe so that I can see you next week for another video, and stay inspired. Bye guys!